Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gabon 24 in this special edition focused on the third edition of the African Climate Week. This morning was the opening session of the African Climate Week hosted by the Gabonese government and organized by UN Climate with global partners, the United Nations Development Program, the United Nations Environment Program, and the World Bank. Partners in the region include the African Union, the African Development Bank, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And to discuss these environment issues, I received Ms. Titi Akosa, Executive Director of the Center for 21st Century Issues in Nigeria. Also with her, Mr. Kiliho. He is a Pan-African Youth Union member and representative of the delegation of Tanzania. Welcome to Gabon 24.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the African Climate Week hosted by the Gabonese government is a regional conference on a collective and efficient response to climate change effects. Sir and lady, how do climate change affect respectively your countries? Ladies first.
Okay, it's very important that we know that Africa is a continent that is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So generally, the whole of Africa is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And then bringing it down to my country, Nigeria, where I come from. In Nigeria, over the years, we have experienced what I call irregular rainfall pattern. At times, we experience a terrible wind that can destroy almost everything we have. At times, we experience a lot of flooding. And in a day, we've experienced a flooding, we've experienced a rainfall of that's supposed to, we should have it within a period of 3 months. We had it in 1 day. And you can imagine what that means for us in terms of destruction to infrastructure, destruction to internet access, destruction to electricity infrastructure, and so many other things. Most of our schools were filled up, they were destroyed, people could not go to school for days, and then people's offices were destroyed, houses, roofs were taken away, and so many things happened just because we had the rain of 3 months in 1 day. These are some of the examples of the impacts of climate change we have witnessed. Okay. And you know, when it happens like that, it is the most vulnerable people who live in unsecured areas that are mostly affected. And most of the time, for them to come back to the mains, it's very, very difficult unless they have enough finance to be able to come back to their position to recover from the shocks and the problems that the impacts of climate change has brought to them. So these are some of the things that have happened in my country.
Thank you, Ms. Akosa. Mr. Kiliho, I think, is it the same case, is it the same catastrophes that we do experience in your country, Tanzania?
Yes, thank you so much, John. So climate change, as my colleague from Nigeria just mentioned, it is cross-cutting, it is multi-sectoral. So extreme weather events which disrupt livelihoods, and so the likes of disrupting infrastructure due to, let's say, strong precipitation and rainfall, other things in particular that can have a tremendous impact in the economic activities, including a reduced productivity. It also impacts the health of people. If people are not very healthy, definitely they cannot contribute to economic participation. So it is the same for us as well. And it's really unfortunate that the impacts of climate change are happening now more than ever, and we could expect to see more unless legitimate actions are taken.
And so something needs to be done. What are your expectations while coming to this African Climate Week?
Yeah. So I think the very significant reason for the Climate Week is to bring together partners and countries. You see, climate is not of a particular country. It's not bound by national boundaries. It is transnational. So it is very important that we look at this matter together, understand both of our differences in terms of the impacts that are happening in each of the other country, and be able to have something in common to address both the countries that would have different impacts from the other countries. So the Climate Week, I look forward that partners and stakeholders, governments and decision makers, together we can brainstorm and find that optimum action to be able to take a collective action. This is very important across the week.
For sure. Mr. Mr. Akosa, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. What are the expectations of that great economic country?
Well, for us in Nigeria, we look at like coming to this African meeting is a space for us, just like my colleague has said, for us to brainstorm together first of all. And then we also want to look at the agenda going forward to COP27. What are the things we are going to be deciding on? What is Africa saying concerning the context of the negotiations? How does it work for us? For instance, we are looking at going to COP to discuss loss and damage, which has also been part of they have put it on the agenda. We are going to look at global goal on adaptation, on even global goal on finance itself. And if you remember that the issue of finance have always been the issue on the front burner of discussions. And the developed countries have promised that they were going to deliver 100 billion per year before year 2020. But yet, this is year 2022, we have not seen up to that, even 100 billion per year, and we have passed 2020. Now we are looking for another benchmark here. Which
These 100 billion US dollars concern one of the promises made in the 26th COP in Glasgow.
No, not Glasgow. It's not Glasgow. It was made in South Africa years back.
Yes, but it was reaffirmed in Glasgow.
It can't be reaffirmed because 2020 has passed. That's what I keep saying. You say you are going to deliver something before 2020, that by 2020 we should have another goal. So now there's a negotiation for us to have a new quantified finance goal.
Without carrying you, they succeeded in reaching 90 billion US dollars. It was,
and I think it was
missing some 10 billion US dollars.
I think it's 80 billion. If I'm
it was
correct.
Anyway
so
about 90.
We are still missing. There's a gap of 20 billion. And when we are talking about, there's a gap of 20 million. We are going to, I think, 100 billion. Okay, there's a gap of 20 billion. Don't let me make mistake. And when we have those kind of gaps, it means that one, the developed country has fallen short of their promises.
For sure.
And then 2020 is past. Another 2 years. This is 2022. Now, we are negotiating a new financial goal. Now, what are the issues that is going to go into it that will help them to decide this is the bulk of the financial goal we are looking at to get to 2030 or from 2025? Before we had 100 billion. And if you look at that 100 billion, it's just a far cry from what even Africa needs, talk less of the whole world in tackling climate change. And if you remember, some of my colleagues here brought what we call the climate clock. If you look at it, we have less than 6 years to stop the impact of climate change, or else we will get into an irreversible position. So we need finance that must match the magnitude of the problems.
For sure. And Mr. Ray, we're talking about 100 billion US dollars promised years back, and today we're experiencing that Tanzania is the most beautiful and richest country in Africa in terms of fauna and flora. Do you think that this African Climate Week 2022 in Gabon is a kind of opportunity to make strong and efficient measures for the protection of the environment?
Of course, of course. First of all, thank you for the compliments about Tanzania. And this also brings another dimension, that the impacts of climate change into the biodiversity and flora and fauna on itself. So the Climate Week really has that an opportunity for us, first of all, to learn from other countries, stakeholders and partners on what they've been able to do. I overscore my colleague just mentioned, climate finance is elemental. So one of the things that we're looking as Tanzania is how can we start to mobilize domestic efforts to address some of these things. We understand finance is very important, but are there any other opportunities to galvanize capabilities that we might have in terms of the human resources as well as the non-financial resources, to see if we can address the issues of climate change and biodiversity. So Tanzania is making lots of progress, and unfortunately we need to do more because climate change is very diverse and adverse as well. So there's a lot of things happening, including restoration of biodiversity, including awareness to the general public around understanding issues of climate change, so they can also be able to, change behavior, because a lot of things happen as a result of certain behaviors. So it is a transition, and we really hope that from the Climate Week we'll be able to come up with a position. I liked what one of the keynote speakers during the opening ceremony in the morning said. We've been doing too much talking. I think it's very important to act. And in acting, we are also reminded by, of course, the recent IPCC sixth assessment report that came out in February this year, that we don't only approach climate change as if it is something for an emotion. We need to have science-based targets. We have targets, we have to now do the action to make sure that we do that kind of action.
For sure, this is really the time for action, and we can see that you are from Tanzania, Mr. Ray, and Mrs. Akosa is from Nigeria, and there is a kind of collective efforts to put a kind of pressure on the table of decision makers to come to appropriate measures that would change life in Africa. Do you think that this African Climate Week is a step to the COP27 that is going to be held in Egypt?
Very well. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again, that this is a kind of a preparation for us as Africans to mobilize our voices as we go on to COP27. As much as we mobilize our voices, we also need to look inwards to see what we can do for ourselves in terms of climate action before we get to the stage where we get additional funding to do what we needed to do. And we have said it, action, action, action. We can never overemphasize it. Yes, it's good for us to say, yes, we need action. What are the kinds of action do we really need on the table? These are very, very important.
Yes.
Some of the actions, like for me as a woman, that we need on the table is for us to actually look at who is being impacted by climate change. When you are being impacted by climate change, what are the things that will show that this is what you are experiencing and this is our needs, and then you meet us at the point of our needs. For us as women, what we need is that we need financing to help us transit from using fossil fuels and unclean fuels to clean energy.
Okay,
we needed that. We
regard...
need a transition. See, we need to be very clear about action, because it's so easy for us to say this is action, this is action. What actually is the action that we need? Some of people give us actions that we don't need. And it's so important for us to sit down. What is our need in Africa? Most of the important things we need for Africa is adaptation. How do we plan for adaptation? How do we plan for resilience? How do we ensure that even if we are going to experience loss and damage, it's just to the barest minimum, so that when the loss and damage facility comes, we should be able to tap into it within 1 week when a disaster strikes. For me,
Akosa,
these are some of the things we want.
Mr. Akosa, do you think that with regard to all that you're saying, we need actions now? Do you think that your country, Nigeria, is doing enough to bring the good measures on the table? Do you think that your country is having a policy that allows environment to be safe, that allows populations to live safer?
Without benefit of that, I can tell you that we are trying our best, but we can still do more. For instance, recently we have just passed our climate change law, and then we have set up the Climate Change Commission. They have appointed somebody to oversee that commission. And apart from that, we've just launched our energy transition plan, which we are looking for about $10 billion to do that. So we are putting money, we are putting actions to it. We have a plan. We have the Climate Change Action Plan also, costed plan. So for us, we already have all that we need. We have our NDCs also that have been submitted to the UNFCCC. And so what it means that any investor, any person that is serious about doing climate action should just look into our NDCs and pick what they need. And we also are here to sell our NDCs to tell people, yes, this is what we need. We need funding. Yes, this is what we are doing for ourselves. Can you match it up with what we are doing? Everybody is ready in Africa. Most countries in Africa have done their NDCs. They have submitted to the UNFCCC, and because the UNFCCC says that it is the developed country that must provide funding for those who have not caused climate change. That's the injustice. We need to continue to harp on that injustice of climate change.
Yeah,
the way it is affecting us. We did not contribute to climate change, but we are suffering from it. And the developed country, it is their mandate to give us the funding.
Express yourself.
Yeah, to give us the funding to adapt and to address loss and damage.
This is the time for equitable, this is the time for just and, let's say, balanced policies. But do you think that African countries should wait for Western organizations, or let's say pre-COPs to be held for them to put real measures on the table? Because it is said that Africa is the continent that is most affected by climate change effects. Yeah. What is being done in your country, Tanzania?
So, on my experience, when we speak of equitable action, I think it's very important to look, it goes both sides. Yeah. It goes that there is that action that the other counterparts that have contributed much on climate change, they have a role to play. And when you speak of equitable and just, even for Africa, even though we have not contributed much, but then what can we do? Even though we didn't contribute just as much as the other countries, but then is there something we can do? So in Tanzania, and especially from where I come from, representing the Pan-African Youth Union, it is also at least very saddening that youths usually come last. It's actually nice that this Climate Week, there's been a lot of effort, there's been a lot of youths participating. So in Tanzania, in that aspect, we've seen a lot of growing interest to learn about what can we actually do. And there's been a lot of conversations from institutions, public institutions and private institutions, to see how can we have a common understanding. Because the danger would be, we could be, like my colleague just mentioned, we've been speaking of action, action, action. But then action is not like the same action across everyone. Each institution, everyone has a different role to play, and they have to play it correctly to deliver that action. So Tanzania is actually now more than ever involving a lot of young people into the climate conservation, engaging youth to take this kind of ownership, but also as a government is really opening up to conversations and discussions with our partners and neighbors to be sure that it is transboundary and transnational, so we can actually be able to do some of the things that requires everyone together. So
okay, you're talking about developed or rich countries, developed countries to pay because they are developed themselves on a kind of development that jeopardize the planet. Do you think that today we have to redefine the development? Because yesterday they called us bush people, and in terms of sustainable development, who have understood the term of sustainable development? Because in Africa, we do know in our villages that we have to make one with the nature. Do you think that it is time for Africa to claim that it has understood the proper way of the sustainable development? Because wherever you go, you're going to find forest. We are here in the Congo Basin area. We have trees everywhere. And even many people are saying that this is the time for carbon tax to be put on the table.
Well, what I would say concerning the proper meaning of sustainable development, just like I always say, it depends on what you define it to be. And the way people understand it. For us as Africans, what do we understand as sustainable development? Do we understand it in the context of the developed world or in our own context?
That's the question. Should we redefine the term development?
Well, it depends. If we think we want to redefine it, then we will redefine it in our own context, in our own realities, and in our own perspective so that it will work for us.
Yes.
If we want to do it and we are bold enough to do it, fine. Very well. and we may put it on the table so that whoever wants to deal with us will understand that this is the way we see it, this is the way we want it, and this is the way we want to go with it.
Because countries such as Gabon are making a lot of contribution, to save the planet, to keep the planet safer. Shouldn't Gabon be regarded as a model in terms of sustainable development?
Yes, I first of all applaud the tremendous efforts, especially of His Excellency the President, of course, for hosting us and how much he's been doing. He's been a champion on climate and at many instances. I think Gabon is doing great, and it's important for other countries as well to learn from what is already happening in Gabon. Mm-hmm. And like I've mentioned as well, climate change is not unanimous. It is different across other localities as you domesticate it. So you could find that one of the actions at one part may not exactly be translated the same to the other part. So we need this embracement of diversity in our approaches while reaffirming and looking into the principles of the intent why we're engaging to address the matters of climate change. So I agree, we think we have a lot to learn, and we have to unify that and embrace the diversity in this approach. It's a holistic approach.
Mr. Akosa, do you think that in Nigeria there are policies that take into account gender equality in terms of facing climate change effects? Do you think that in Nigeria women are well protected?
Well, it's a different thing to say women are well protected, but to say that we have policies, yes, we do. Mm-hmm. Nigeria has what we call the Gender and Climate Change Action Plan, mm-hmm. which goes up to 2025. And we have started implementing it. And I know some countries don't even yet have the Gender and Climate Action Plan. So we have a costed Gender and Climate and Action Plan, which we have started implementing it. But it's a different kettle of fish, where that action plan is covered everybody. When you are implementing an action plan, at times it may not be even. But one good thing is that we have a plan that we can lay claim to. A plan that we can take anywhere and say, this is what our action plan says, we need it to be done. And we can use it to even look for investment into gender equality in climate actions. Mm-hmm. So for us, it is very important that any climate action you are taking, gender is considered from Nigeria. And that is what the UNFCCC says. Most of the decisions in UNFCCC have always continued to reach you. Even the UNFCCC has its own gender action plan, which countries who are negotiating under the UNFCCC must follow and they must obey. So for us in Nigeria, yes, we have the action plan, but yet the action is not yet enough because it's a plan from 2020, I think it's from 2021 or so, mm-hmm. to 2025. So it's still an action that is still on course.
Okay, Mr. Ray, after all that we've mentioned on this set, are you optimistic when you look to the future?
Well, I am worried. I'm worried on a variety of course, points. One is we're supposed to be very intentional in addressing the temperature goal, of course. But then we feel like we're not doing just enough because the recent one of the key things during the COP, the latest COP, is governments and stakeholders are urged to increase the ambitions. Ambitions as in every country had submitted like their NDCs, the nationally determined contributions to address climate change, mm-hmm. but we were urged to increase the level of ambition. It's not enough to do just enough. It's enough to do what is supposed to be done. So I am worried that that level of common understanding, because when you say we have to increase ambitions, we have to have that collective picture of this is what, and this is why, and this is what could happen if we actually won't do this. So am I optimistic? I think there's quite more readiness to do the actions, but we need to have that level of common understanding to be able to get to that collective point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ray. This is your last word. Mr. Akosa, you're going to say something to all the viewers who are who are watching us about this African Climate Week. We've talked about expectations, we talked about measures to be taken, we talked about a lot of things, but in the very end, what is your opinion?
Well, looking at all the issues that we have discussed here, I will always remember what the faith and climate people normally say. They will say we have hope.
Okay.
Yes, we have hope.
We have hope. These are the words of Miss Titi Akosa. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of this special edition. Thank you for having been on this set, Miss Titi Akosa. I say you are the executive director for the executive director of Center for 23rd Century Issues in Nigeria.
Yes.
And you, Mr. Ray, you are the Pan-African Youth Union and representative of the delegation that came from Tanzania.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Dear
much.
viewers, thank you for watching us on Gabon 24. Stay safe and stay blessed. See you soon.